As the government of President Bola Tinubu continues in its strides to implement all policies in his renewed hope agenda, opposition parties are already looking forward to the 2027 general elections as political realignments have begun, mainly within the opposition camp. This came to the fore as the group of 5 People's Democratic Party (PDP) governors reaffirmed support for President Bola Tinubu ahead of 2027. The National Consultative Front, led by Professor Utomi, has said the focus of the former Vice President, Atiku Abubakar, former governors of Anambra State, Peter Obi, and former governor of Kano State, Rabiu Kwankwaso, was not contesting the 2027 presidential election, but how to build a formidable political party that would rescue Nigeria from the grips of the All Progressives Congress, APC. Interestingly, the Labour Party and the PDP had at different times last year distanced themselves from talks of a merger following Atiku's call for a united front among the opposition leaders. While the Labour Party presidential candidate in 2023, Peter Obi, recently declared that his party was ready to be Nigeria's main opposition party this year, one of Atiku's spokesmen, Daniel Bwala, stated that his boss will contest the 2027 election, warning that the opposition must unite behind him if they intend to unseat the APC. With the news of mergers gaining momentum, the Coalition for United Political Parties, CUPP, have rejected Atiku as the rallying point of the opposition parties in Nigeria ahead of the 2027 general election. Well, joining us on the show this morning to discuss the possibility of a merger of the opposition parties and how it can be achieved is Professor Utomi, convener of the National Consultative Front, NCFront. Good morning, Professor Utomi, and thank you so much for joining us today on the morning show.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be able to join you.
Excellent. All right, so during my introduction, I'd talked about a few things, just giving a little background into what the situation on ground is, with a possible merger as talks are apparently going on amongst some key opposition party members as to coming together to go against the APC come 2027. The first question I'd like to ask you, Professor Utomi, this one is it too early to begin to talk about elections 2027 whilst not talking about building a formidable opposition in order to check this present administration? That's the first question I'd like to ask you today.
You literally took the answer I was going to give to the question you were going to ask out of my mouth. I think it's inappropriate to even talk about 2027. We're talking about governing. We're talking about a working democracy. Nigeria is not a working democracy. And part of the effort of building a strong and viable political party is to make our democracy work first and foremost before people begin to think about another election. The problem with Nigeria is that we've thought in terms of elections. You go through a mess that is called an election and say, okay, let's wait for the next one. No, that's not how countries grow and develop. Countries grow and develop, first of all, by founding political parties. I can say without any feeling of wrong that we don't have a political party in Nigeria today. What we have managed to couple together since 1999 have been platforms for machine politics, where the game is about just grabbing power, rightly or wrongly, and sharing spoils. As a friend of mine, an American political scientist who's in the middle of a very interesting book, he's still writing it, probably will finish it later this year. I'm actually inviting him to come and speak about it in Lagos in a few weeks. And he makes the argument that what has gone wrong with Nigeria's democracy is that in 1999, somehow the politicians managed to build a kind of coalition that enabled them keep out the military, but essentially put themselves in a position to share the spoils, and did not think of Nigeria and governing to make Nigeria better. So election after election, yes, we've kept some cycle going, and politicians have been able to go and share spoils, but Nigeria has gotten worse and worse and worse. And the Nigerian people are so unhappy that the effect has been violence all through. He does a remarkable comparison with the opposite, which is what has happened to India. If you look at India in 1999, it was a lot more violent in terms of rejection of the ways. But a developmental state has emerged in India. Their politics, the coalition, has been about making India work for Indians. And as India has done that, it's become wealthier, more stable. Violence has receded and receded in India, while it's rising and rising and rising in Nigeria. So one of the major reasons why this is happening is that Nigeria did not manage to build a political party. It built these coalitions of politicians trying to share spoils in a rentier state. And it has neglected the people of Nigeria, the development. So the first thing is, can we have a real political party? And that's where our conversation begins. How do we build a political party that is clear in its sense of where Nigeria should be, the role that everybody should play in getting Nigeria there, how political parties recruit and socialize people and mobilize the whole populace to focus on these ideas about how progress comes to everybody. And that then leads to true progress, as we see in India. I've spoken very frequently about the simple difference between a Nigerian political party and, say, the ANC, for all you care. Omano Edigije, Omano, has written this book on developmental state in South Africa and now in Nigeria. And Omano keeps making the point that the Nigerian state is in the developmental state. And it's true. It is just a coalition of politicians to share greedy sharing of spoils of office. Because of that, the neglect of development, the triumph of corruption in Nigeria has just made it difficult for Nigeria to develop. Look how South Asia has now emerged, overtaking even Southeast Asia of the miracle economies in terms of sheer economic development and growth. Because the Indian state, in the nature of the political coalitions that emerged around the same time as we were becoming a new democracy, have focused on the Indian people and growing India. And you will see fascinating videos talking about where India is, where it will be, and all of that. In Nigeria, our politicians don't even have a care for the Nigerian people and where they are going. And I give you an example. My own book, which is out next month, in interviewing senior civil servants, a former head of service says to me, civil servants do nothing. Head of service. They do nothing because the political parties don't come with a program. If a political party comes to power, it should have a program that defines what the permanent secretary literally will do in 4 years. How to hold him accountable for delivering a premium on performance for implementation, all the way to the level 8 officer. And this becomes the basis. And I added to this, if we have a tripartite approach to development, which involves the private sector, the public sector, and the so-called private development agencies or the NGO sector, what we will see is a continual state of checks and balances and innovation for growth and development, which is what has happened more or less in India. But in Nigeria, all you hear about is they shared that money, they took that money, they take that money. Yeah.
Okay, Prof. Good to see you again, and I'm so thankful you're looking well and you're doing well. How are you? How's your health? And
thank you so much.
I'm so happy, you're back here.
Health is kicking up.
It is well.
Yes.
It is well. You're a fighter. You'll continue to fight and you'll win
indeed,
over the challenges of health. And I wish you well and Happy New Year.
Amen.
But Prof, real quickly.
Happy New Year.
You were here a couple of years ago and we theorized about the Nigerian political space. In fact, you got a bunch of people together, the usual suspects, the Lisagbakovas of this world, and a couple of people, and they said, oh, we're having something mega new. But nothing materialized. And you pivoted with the Labour Party, and you guys ran a stellar campaign. You didn't win. The same forces, the centripetal and centrifugal forces of, our political system did still take over and reign supreme in the end. And we saw how the political process went. The question is, how do you think that this, your joining together of forces for sort of this risorgimento of some sort you want, this rising again, how do you think it will work this time if it didn't pan out then? And I want you to analyze for me your very good friend's government, because you're very friendly with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Analyze these cases of corruption, allegations of corruption, 40 billion, all of that. What's your say about all of this? And do you still speak to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu? When last did you talk to him? Do you still advise him?
I've not spoken with him in 5 years, actually.
Okay.
And that's a statement about my perception of many things, including the way the APC evolved. The truth of the matter, the naked truth, is that what is happening in Nigeria is inevitable, because the Nigerian state is not constructed to serve the Nigerian people. It's constructed to be bargaining between politicians looking to share booty. Because that is what it is, you will have all this corruption, because it's like, oh, you've taken your own, you don't want me to take my own. The Nigerian people don't matter in these conversations. How did we do the last time? Well, it's kind of you to say that we put all of this together and then we lost election. I still completely reject the idea that we lost election. That's not true. But Nigeria is what it is.
So you're not confident about the court?
The movement that became...
So you're not confident about the court?
Was a farce. Total farce.
The Supreme Court judgment was a farce?
I said a farce. Nigerian court system, complete farce.
Are you not impugning on the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court judgment was a farce? Was it a farce? Is that what you're saying?
My opinion, as part of Utomi, it was a farce. But let's just put that aside and go on. There's a legitimacy crisis in Nigeria. Look, Prof, I'm around the world. I'm around the planet. I'm talking in very important places around the world on a, I don't know, so frequently. I know what they think of what happened in Nigeria. So that's not a disputable matter at all. And I've cited continuously what the EU mission said about the elections, what NDI said, what IRI said. But I don't want us to go back into the elections. That's not the issue for now. I'm just trying to make the point that the last elections, we're not about P2B, by the way. The Nigerian people had become so frustrated, so fed up with the nature of the way Nigerian politicians carried on, that when Peter Obi said the right things, it resonated and drove the emergence of a movement that generally got called the obedient movement. Around the world, Nigerian diaspora, and if you look at the resurgence of many of the success stories of the 20th century, they had a diaspora base from post-Meiji Restoration Japan. Japanese diaspora was pretty important in that happening. The Indian diaspora has been very significant in what is going on in India. Chinese diaspora had its place, and so on and so forth. So the Nigerian diaspora rallied very strongly around the fact that this gentleman was saying a few things right. And a campaign like Nigeria hasn't seen in a long time happened. And it was deliberately sabotaged, whatever you say about it. And the point remains, how do you go forward when you meet this? You've got to realize and take advantage in trying to save Nigeria that the majority of this country is young. A significant part of our population is under 25. It is fed up. It is looking for something new, but it's also trapped. That's the most dangerous thing about where we are. This generation is trapped in their values. Look, why is Nigeria not growing? Why are multinationals leaving and all of that? If your politicians are constantly cheating at every turn, they cheat at elections, they cheat in using of public resources. The U.S. Treasury Secretary is found in economy class, but the Nigerian minister will charter a plane to go to somewhere next door. In a very, very poor country, you realize there's a complete disconnect between the political actors in Nigeria and the people of Nigeria. So when that is the state that you have, what do you expect to happen with how you move forward with this population that is the majority? You've got to come to some sense that at a point, they won't be able to hold down the majority anymore. And it might be very costly for them. Very, very costly personally for them. So you will begin to see a breaking. See, look at the tracks we're traveling. We are traveling to Somalia, where we should be traveling through India to somewhere else right now. The analysis of this American political scientist friend of mine, who, like I said, will be in Lagos in a few weeks to share some of his thoughts on this, basically looks at a Nigerian scenario where, you know, there will be increased violence in Nigeria, and as an expression of frustration, and we've seen it become universal in Nigeria, whether it started from Boko Haram, kidnapping in the southeast, the Niger Delta militancy, and all of that.
Prof, would you respect, sir? Would you respect, sir? A lot of your critics say you are just theorizing. That this was the same you that supported this same evolution of Buhari and APC. In fact, you are even a member of the APC. That you are part of them. It's just that you've turned a new leaf. Now, that's what a lot of your opponents and your critics say. That this was the exact way. I mean, I think the last time you were here, you talked about Kaplan too, making this prediction, you know, that things were going to... That we all know this.
Yes.
But the theorizing does not solve the problem. That's what a lot of your critics would say.
Aren't you seeing it happening?
Yes, but...
But are you not seeing it happening? Is it... yeah. So what's the point of theory?
But they say you are part of the class.
How it leads to action.
You are part of that class. That's what they're saying.
Class that did what?
You're part of that bourgeoisie elite class in this country. That's what they're saying. And that's why they say all of this is just theory.
But how? Let them show how. Because you see...
You were a member of the APC. You played a prominent role in the APC. Didn't you, Prof?
Yeah. I played a role in the founding of... I've played a role in the founding of the APC in the expectation that we could create a difference. But we just absorbed some of the other people from PDP and created a worse PDP. And I walked away from the very beginning. I have never been active in the APC in any shape, form, position, anything. I was never.
But you tried running for governor in Delta. You tried attending party primaries for governor in Delta.
Yes.
That was an aspiration.
Yes, and what happened?
And they changed the venue. They showed you politics.
People argued.
They changed the venue.
They didn't show me politics. By the way, that story going around. No, that's not true, actually. That story is not correct.
Okay,
but they created those kinds of stories. I showed up. Yeah, the correct story is that there was a meeting called. The one retired general, Onoja, I think, Lawrence Onoja, was chair of the event. They came in there. It was a premeditated, predetermined scam. And I said it to them and literally walked away from there. We had been to the venue, so it wasn't a question that the venue was not known to me. And I was even going to go back there, but some of the people there said, don't make a fool of yourself to go to this place. We have seen what they've done here. Onoja was a disgrace at this meeting. I will say it in public and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And that was what happened. You know, there was no plan to have an election. There was no democracy. I wrote letters and letters to show what happened. Even Adams Oshomole said he would tell me one day the truth of what happened. I said, fine, one day tell me. But you see, Nigerian politicians don't believe in democracy. That's what I proved. And I needed to prove it. Once I proved it, I just walked away. I walked away completely. And I wrote a book about it. You probably have read Why Not? You know, and you've got to, you're not going to just go and sit in one place and shout and complain. You cannot, you know, say that somebody like me who went in there, saw it happen, hasn't a superior position on somebody who is complaining in one corner. No. Do something before you die. Ghanaians used to sing to Jerry Rollins.
All right.
And the idea of trying to do something and finding that it is run by people who are inappropriate for where the country should be going is a very important discovery path. So you cannot group somebody who goes in and says, this is not what we want to be doing as part of that group. That's not how groups function.
All right. Thanks, Professor Utomi. I'd like to ask you with regards to this proposed merger or perhaps contemplated merger. In the event that it does work out and they come together to form a strong opposition party, one united, who should be leading this party? I mean, in my introduction, I talked about the fact that Daniel Bwala of the PDP had said that everyone should rally round Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, who would be 80 years old, by the way, in 4 years' time. He'll be 81, but at least it's in November of 2027. So 80 years old if he does become president. Or should they be looking at a more vibrant, younger person like a Peter Obi, and the obedient movement has been able to galvanize and lead? Who should people be looking at, or who should the party be looking at as a front runner for that new merger?
I think it is too early to be talking about who. Let's talk about how, what we can do to make Nigeria work. When the time comes, the people, and that's why it's called democracy, will determine who. I can tell you with a good sense of satisfaction that in the last week or so, I've had significant conversations with Atiku Abubakar. I've had significant conversations with Engineer Rabiu Kwankwaso. I've had conversations with Mr. Peter Obi. And my view is very clear on this matter. Let's build a great party that can show the way for Nigeria. When we then build it, the people who, from the social movements that come together, in addition to the political parties that come into this one stock, subscribing to certain values, subscribing to ideologies of how you make a nation happen, those people will determine who amongst those who seem interested can go forward. This is what our country does need. This is what it must have. But it should not be about some individual advertising that they are the ones who should or not. Nigerian people will determine that when the time is right. But let's all agree that Nigeria is what? The trouble, the saving. And let those values, those strategies, those ideas that can help us create an entrepreneurial people's capitalism that can take us away from this elite struggle to consume the little that is, coming out of oil, to a broadly growing economy the way India is happening, because they are applying themselves, and we can make progress. There are too many people who complain and point fingers and say this about that person, about that, and they do nothing. But they just, sit there and whine. Let's get people who are thinking, who would like to see Nigeria get somewhere, sit down, put down the ideas about what will make Nigeria make progress. It's not a shame. Are we not ashamed to see the way Nigeria is, the poverty in the land, the anger in the land, with all the endowments of this country, where 70% of the doctors of color in America are Nigerian born? Why is this happening to our country? We've got to accept that the political class is responsible for this failure and begin to work at renewing that class.
Okay, Professor Utomi, you were a young man when you first had a close contact with government over 40 years ago. So you are about those few Nigerians that have seen it all. These things you are talking about was talked about over 40 years ago. And this has still been the problem. The elite class, we remember what happened in the 70s into the 80s and all of that, then the military taking over. And nothing has changed. At some point, you said you decided to even join them. But the same people you joined and you helped create the APC is the same party we are complaining that stinks today. The same Bola Tinubu that was a very close friend of yours is the same Bola Tinubu that is president today that you are saying, no, we need a new party to challenge. And I was shocked that you said you had not spoken to Bola Tinubu in 5 years, because I felt you guys were really chummy. But, that things have just gone down the drain. So why is it that we keep going back in this cyclical cycle of stinking thinking in our country? Because it doesn't move forward. 40 years after going to 50 years, the same things you complained about. I was reading Lasisi Olagunju's article on Monday, was saying, as at way back 1951-52, they were citing cases of corruption in governmental agencies. And we are still hearing of it over 70 years today, unabated. So why are we going through this? And if there's anything you want to look back on, how is it that this new party you are ensuring, that you are trying to start up, how are you going to ensure that it's not going to be like the APC you are now condemning today? Because that was how the APC came with a lot of hope. Say Baba was a rallying song in 2015. Oh, people loved President Muhammadu Buhari. But a couple of years down the line, it has gone down the drain again.
I think that there is enough evidence to explain why we are where we are. And that is why it is important to recognize that one of the big problems in Nigeria is that the Nigerian political culture has become very anti-intellectual. So it seems unable to examine what its problems are and try and rework its position. Back in the 1950s, you could see massive growth and development out of what Robert Melson and Howard Wolpe chose to call essentially competitive communalism. In the struggle between the regions to bring about growth for their region, you see the massive development that took place. The jump in industrialization in Nigeria is a phenomenal one that should be studied and studied again. From what happened between 1957 and the early 60s with manufacturing in Nigeria. And then what happened? A number of things. One, the convergence of soldiers and oil. That thesis on the convergence of soldiers and oil led to what my friend Richard Joseph calls bureaucratic prebendalism. This concept of the big man at the top handing out prebends, the turning upside down of the Nigerian constitution, which prevented a federal structure from bringing development and progress the way it brought between 1957 and 1965. Because of the tensions in the West and all of that, led us down a path in which corruption has become so norm that there's a generation that doesn't even know that there was a time Nigerians, even though there were bits of corruption, and there's corruption everywhere, but you hold people accountable, arrest those who are corrupt, try them, jail them, create systems that make the possibilities for corruption much less. I tell you, I was as part of the research for this book that I was talking about, talking to one former due process person, and I was talking about the civil service, and he says to me, civil servants, what do they have to? They own most of the houses in Abuja. They got to a point where basically what they do is look for how to, game the system, and so we damaged the basis for creating wealth, the competitiveness that leads to economic development and growth. And this has come through in the way that our country has gone forward. If we can sit and talk to one another and recognize where things went wrong, if we can have a constitution that goes back to where we were in 1960s, more or less, in terms of the sensitivities and sensibilities of the ground norm, we can then say to ourselves, here is how to ensure that a kind of public service that can implement the ideas within this new arrangement, this new structure, can proceed. And believe me, I am confident that you will see progress. And I'd like to give an example. It's not so true that when things go wrong, they don't get better. Malaysia's story. Look, when we had the Nigerian Civil War, Malaysians were killing each other on the streets of Kuala Lumpur. They had these race riots in 1969. But what happened? Look at the Mahathir Mohamad story and how Mahathir, as a young minister, criticized the then prime minister about the direction the country was traveling. He was immediately expelled from the party, of course, removed from the cabinet. He went and wrote a book, The Malay Dilemma. The thing that book drove led to the resignation of Tun Abdul Razak on as prime minister. Mahathir came back into the party, eventually became prime minister, and basically pulled the Malaysian elite together and literally said to them, look, I want everybody to sit in that room and figure out where we go from here, because it is best for everybody to be inside the house,
all right,
pissing out, and for some to be outside the house, pissing in.
All right.
The result, the new economic policy and the story of Malaysia. So I think it is possible to do it. We just have to have people who are serious about doing it, who are committed. You look back and you see what has happened to our country. There are Nigerians who have made sacrifices continually.
Yes.
And we can find those Nigerians to sacrifice for making this country work.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Pat Utomi, and thanks for just sharing that message that it is certainly possible. It's not impossible to turn a nation around, even though it's gone through difficult cycles of leadership. It's very, very possible. Thank you for your time this morning.